When a young woman sacrifices her health to save the uncle who raised her, she uncovers the unseen cost of loyalty and love, forcing her family to confront the delicate balance between gratitude and obligation. After losing her parents at a tender age, Akua finds solace and stability in her uncle Kwame, who takes her in and sacrifices much to provide her with a chance at a promising future. As the years pass, Akua's life flourishes under Kwame's care, and her gratitude deepens with every opportunity he affords her. But fate takes a cruel turn when Kwame falls gravely ill, and the only hope for his survival is a life-saving transplant. Without hesitation, Akua volunteers as a donor, despite the personal risks. Her decision, born of love and a sense of debt, leaves her family awestruck and deeply divided. While Kwame's health improves, Akua's begins to falter, throwing her family into turmoil. As her once bright future dims, Akua questions the extent to which gratitude must be repaid. Meanwhile, Kwame wrestles with profound guilt, grateful for her sacrifice yet haunted by the cost to her well-being. Fractures emerge within the family as old wounds resurface, and they grapple with unspoken expectations, moral dilemmas, and conflicting loyalties. Akua's act of selflessness sets off a chain of events that force her family to reevaluate their bonds, asking whether the sacrifices we make for those we love can ever be too great. The news came on a rainy Sunday evening. Akua stood by the window of her childhood home, watching the rain blur the city lights, when the phone call shattered her world. Her parents, on their way back from a wedding, had died in a car accident. At just 14 years old, Akua was thrust into a life of uncertainty. Her uncle Kwame, her father's younger brother, stepped forward. He became her rock, pulling her from the depths of despair. He provided not just shelter but hope, taking her into his modest home in Accra. As years passed, Kwame's sacrifices became evident, paying her school fees, skipping meals to save, and even selling his car so Akua could attend a prestigious university abroad. A young girl stands by a rain-streaked window, her silhouette framed by the faint glow of city lights. Behind her, a somber man holds a phone to his ear, delivering life-changing news. Akua flourished under Kwame's guidance. She excelled academically, earning accolades and scholarships. Every time she stood on a stage to collect an award, her eyes searched for Kwame in the crowd. His proud, teary-eyed smile became her compass. But as Akua's gratitude grew, so did her awareness of the sacrifices Kwame had made. He worked tirelessly, never once complaining, always ensuring she had everything she needed. His kindness was her motivation, his unwavering belief in her, her greatest strength. A graduation ceremony in a bustling auditorium. In the foreground, a radiant young woman in a cap and gown holds a degree. In the background, an older man in a worn suit cheers, his face lit with pride and emotion. Just as Akua's life was reaching new heights, Kwame's health began to falter. At first, it was subtle, fatigue, occasional dizziness. Then, the diagnosis, a rare kidney disease. The doctor's words were a blur, but one thing was clear: he needed a transplant. The family was tested, and only Akua was a match. Without hesitation, Akua agreed. "He gave me my life," she said. "This is the least I can do." Despite the family's protests, Akua underwent the procedure. As Kwame's strength returned, hers began to wane. A dimly lit hospital room. A young woman lies on a bed, pale and weak, her arm hooked to and fro. Across the room, an older man sits in a wheelchair, staring out the window, guilt etched on his face. Weeks turned into months. Akua struggled with persistent fatigue and recurring infections. Her once bright future dimmed under the shadow of her declining health. Meanwhile, Kwame found it impossible to look her in the eye. His gratitude was suffocating, his guilt consuming. Family gatherings became tense. Relatives whispered, questioning whether Akua should have made such a sacrifice. She had her whole life ahead of her, they said. Akua, overhearing them, began to wonder if her decision had been the right one. A family dinner scene, heavy with tension. In the foreground, a young woman sits quietly, her face weary. Around her, relatives exchange glances there. One evening, a heated argument broke out between Akua and Kwame. "I never asked you to do it," Kwame shouted, his voice trembling. Akua's voice broke as she replied, "But I couldn't let you die." The argument left them both shattered, their once close bond fraying under the weight of unspoken expectations and unresolved guilt. For the first time, Akua felt truly alone. A small, dimly lit living room. Two figures stand apart, facing each other with tear-streaked faces. The room feels claustrophobic, the tension palpable. In the months that followed, Akua began attending a support group for organ donors. There, she met others who had made similar sacrifices and shared their struggles. Slowly, she began to heal, not just physically but emotionally. Kwame, too, sought solace, volunteering at the hospital where he had received treatment. He started to understand that gratitude didn't have to be a burden. Together, they began rebuilding their relationship, brick by brick. A sunny park where a young woman sits on a bench, surrounded by a small group of people in animated conversation. Nearby, an older man helps push a wheelchair-bound child, a smile softening his features. Akua and Kwame stood side by side at her university graduation ceremony, this time as equals. Their journey had been painful, but it had also brought clarity. Love, they realized, wasn't about keeping score. It was about showing up for each other, no matter the cost. As Akua threw her cap into the air, she looked at Kwame and smiled. For the first time in a long while, she felt whole. A vibrant outdoor graduation scene. A young woman stands in her cap and gown, laughing as she tosses her cap into the air. Beside her, an older man claps, his face beaming with pride and relief. Akua's newfound peace was short-lived. Weeks after her graduation, she began experiencing fainting spells. The doctors discovered complications from the surgery, and her condition required constant monitoring. The gravity of her health issues weighed on her like a storm cloud she couldn't escape. Kwame, now healthier than ever, was racked with guilt. Despite Akua's insistence that she didn't regret her decision, he couldn't shake the feeling that he owed her more than gratitude. Determined to make things right, Kwame began revisiting moments in their past, questioning where he had gone wrong. He wondered if his love had been too demanding, if his sacrifices had somehow demanded hers in return. A quiet hospital corridor at sunset. A man leans against the wall, hands clasped together, staring down at the floor in deep contemplation. Down the hallway, a young woman sits in a wheelchair by a window, gazing out at the horizon. Akua's health struggles began to affect her relationships. Her best friend, Nana, once her closest confidant, voiced what no one else dared to say. "You didn't owe him this, Akua," Nana said one afternoon. "You've always felt like you had to repay him, but at what cost you have. Too much." Akua, torn between anger and understanding, responded defensively. "You don't understand. He's the reason I'm here. I can't just sit back and do nothing." Their friendship, once a sanctuary, now felt strained and fragile. Akua couldn't help but wonder if Nana was right. A heated conversation on a university campus. Two young women sit on a bench, one leaning forward with her hands gesturing animatedly, while the other sits back, arms crossed, looking away in frustration. One evening, while sorting through old family photos, Akua stumbled upon a letter tucked into an album. It was addressed to her from Kwame, written years ago when she first moved into his home. In the letter, Kwame poured out his fears about taking on the responsibility of raising her and his hope that he could give her the life she deserved. "Akua," he wrote, "I don't know if I can be enough for you, but I promise I'll try. Not because I have to, but because I love you like my own daughter." The words brought tears to her eyes. For the first time, she saw the depth of Kwame's love as something selfless, not transactional. She realized her sacrifice wasn't an obligation, it was a choice she made out of love, just as Kwame had chosen to care for her. A dimly lit room with a young woman sitting on the floor, surrounded by scattered photographs. In her hand, she holds an old, weathered letter, her face illuminated by a single desk lamp. Determined to embrace life despite her challenges, Akua decided to channel her experiences into something meaningful. She began advocating for organ donors and educating people on the realities of their sacrifices. Kwame joined her efforts, using his story as a recipient to raise awareness about the importance of gratitude without guilt. Their shared mission brought them closer, rekindling the bond they thought they had lost. Together, they built a foundation that offered financial and emotional support to donors and their families, ensuring no one would feel alone in their journey. A crowded community hall filled with people. At the front, a young woman stands at a podium, speaking passionately, while an older man beside her nods in support. The audience listens intently, some wiping tears from their eyes. 1 year later, Akua faced another surgery to address lingering complications. As she lay in the hospital bed, Kwame held her hand tightly, tears streaming down his face. "You don't have to do this alone," he whispered. "You never did." The surgery was a success, but the recovery was long. In those quiet, reflective months, Akua found strength she didn't know she had. She realized her story wasn't about loss or sacrifice, it was about love, resilience, and the power of choice. A serene hospital room bathed in morning light. A young woman rests in bed, her eyes closed while a man sits beside her, his hand clasped over hers, both radiating quiet strength. Years later, Akua stood in front of a packed auditorium as the recipient of a humanitarian award for her advocacy work. Kwame, now elderly but vibrant, watched from the front row, pride shining in his eyes. "Everything I've done," Akua said, her voice steady but emotional, "is because someone once chose to love me unconditionally. This isn't just my story, it's ours." The crowd erupted in applause as Akua and Kwame shared a tearful embrace. Their journey had been one of pain and healing, of guilt and forgiveness, but most importantly, of love that transcended all boundaries. A grand auditorium filled with applauding attendees. On stage, a woman holds a golden award, tears in her eyes, as an elderly man joins her, both basking in the moment of sheer triumph. Despite her accomplishments and the sense of purpose her advocacy brought, Akua still carried the physical scars and the emotional weight of her journey. One evening, she found herself back at the family home she had once shared with her parents. Dust lined the old furniture, and the air was thick with memories. Walking through the house, she entered her father's old study, where a single photograph of her parents and Uncle Kwame sat on the desk. Akua felt an overwhelming surge of emotions, grief for what she had lost and gratitude for what she still had. It was in that moment she realized that life wasn't about perfect choices but about the courage to face the consequences of those choices with grace. A dimly lit study in an old family home. A young woman stands before a wooden desk, gazing at a framed photograph of 3 smiling figures, her expression a mixture of sorrow and peace. As Akua reconciled her past, she reached out to Nana, her estranged best friend. The years of silence between them had created a chasm, but Akua was determined to bridge it. Over coffee, Akua shared her struggles, admitting that she had sometimes felt trapped by her gratitude. Nana listened quietly before saying, "I may not have agreed with your choice, but I never stopped admiring your strength. I missed you, Akua." Their reunion was tentative but heartfelt, rekindling a friendship that had been built on years of trust. Akua learned that true relationships could survive even the harshest trials when built on understanding and forgiveness. A cozy cafe setting. 2 women sit at a corner table, one speaking earnestly while the other listens intently, a soft smile forming on her face. Steam rises from their untouched coffee mugs. Kwame, inspired by Akua's reconciliation with Nana, began to address his own strained relationships. He reached out to relatives who had criticized Akua's decision, inviting them to a family gathering at his home. The atmosphere was tense at first, but as stories of Kwame and Akua's journey were shared, the walls of judgment began to crumble. By the end of the evening, laughter and warmth filled the house. For the first time in years, the family felt united. Lively family gathering in a warm, well-lit home. Multiple generations sit around the dining table, sharing stories and laughter. In the center, an older man and a young woman share a knowing smile. One day, as Akua prepared for a speaking engagement, she caught Kwame watching her from the doorway. "You've done more than I ever imagined," he said softly. "But don't let this work define you. Your life is more than your sacrifices." His words stayed with her. For so long, Akua had poured her energy into advocacy, sometimes at the cost of her own happiness. She realized that while her mission was important, she needed to create space for her own dreams. A sunlit bedroom with a young woman standing by a mirror, adjusting a blazer. Behind her, an older man leans against the doorway, his face a blend of pride and concern. Akua decided to take a step back from her foundation, entrusting its operations to a dedicated team. She enrolled in a graduate program in psychology, a dream she had set aside. Her focus shifted to researching the psychological impact of gratitude and sacrifice, blending her personal experiences with academic insight. Kwame, now enjoying his retirement, spent his days mentoring young men in the community, teaching them the value of love and responsibility. Though their paths diverged, their bond remained unshakable, rooted in mutual respect and a shared history. A university library filled with soft light. A young woman sits at a desk, surrounded by books and notes, her face glowing with quiet determination. Years later, Akua published a book titled The Price of Gratitude. The memoir detailed her journey, exploring the complexities of family, love, and the sacrifices we make for those we cherish. The book became a bestseller, sparking conversations about the nuanced dynamics of gratitude and obligation. At the book launch, Akua dedicated the evening to Kwame. "This story is ours," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "It's a testament to the power of love and the resilience it gives us to face life's greatest challenges." Kwame, seated in the front row, stood to applaud her. His frail hands trembled, but his smile was steady. For Akua, his approval was worth more than the accolades of the crowd. A grand book launch event in a modern auditorium. A woman stands at a podium, holding a book, while an older man in the audience rises to clap, the spotlight catching his proud smile. In her later years, Akua became a mentor to young women, sharing her story and helping them navigate the delicate balance of loyalty and self-care. She often quoted her uncle's advice: "Love is not measured by sacrifice alone but by the joy it brings to those who give and receive it." Kwame passed away peacefully in his sleep one rainy night, leaving behind a legacy of love and resilience. At his funeral, Akua spoke of his life not as a series of sacrifices but as a testament to unconditional love. Though his absence left a void, Akua felt his presence in every choice she made, every life she touched. The journey they had shared had not only shaped their lives but had left an indelible mark on everyone around them. A serene cemetery on a cloudy day. A young woman in a black dress stands before a grave adorned with fresh flowers, her head bowed in quiet reflection as rain softly falls. Months after Kwame's passing, Akua discovered a sealed envelope among his belongings. The envelope was addressed to her, marked with a note in Kwame's handwriting, "To be opened when you are ready to know everything." Inside was a letter and a stack of legal documents. As Akua read the letter, her breath hitched. Kwame revealed a shocking truth: her father's death had not been an accident. Her parents had been targeted by individuals involved in a financial scandal, and Kwame had long suspected foul play but kept it hidden to protect her. The legal documents detailed Kwame's years of work to uncover the truth and ensure justice for her parents. The final line of the letter read, "I didn't tell you because I wanted you to live free of bitterness, but I trust you to decide what to do with this knowledge." A dimly lit room with a young woman sitting on the floor, clutching an old letter. Her face is a mix of shock and determination, while a stack of legal papers lies scattered around her. Determined to uncover the truth, Akua delved into Kwame's research. She found names, dates, and connections that hinted at a conspiracy involving high-ranking officials. With the help of Nana, who had connections in journalism, Akua began piecing together the events leading to her parents' deaths. Her investigation led her to a man named Emmanuel Mensah, a former business associate of her father who had fled the country years ago. Akua tracked him down, and after weeks of persistence, he agreed to meet her. A tense meeting in a dimly lit cafe. A young woman sits across from an older man with a weathered face, his expression wary as she slides a folder across the table. Emmanuel revealed that her father had discovered corruption within the company they worked for, implicating several powerful figures. He had planned to expose them, but before he could, the accident happened. Emmanuel admitted he had fled out of fear for his own life. But the story didn't end there. Emmanuel claimed that Kwame had been pressured into staying silent after the accident, threatened by the same people who had orchestrated it. The revelation shook Akua to her core. Everything Kwame had done for her now carried a darker undertone. He had been protecting her from a danger she didn't even know existed. A dark alley behind a cafe, where a young woman confronts an older man. Their faces are illuminated by the faint glow of a street lamp, her expression intense, his filled with regret. As Akua prepared to take the evidence public, she encountered an unexpected betrayal. A family member, her cousin Yo, who had always been jealous of her bond with Kwame, had been complicit in covering up the truth. Yo had worked with the very people who silenced her father, benefiting from their corruption. When confronted, Yo lashed out. "You think Kwame was perfect? He made choices, too. He chose to protect you at the cost of justice." His words cut deep, leaving Akua questioning whether exposing the truth would truly honor her parents or tarnish Kwame's memory. A heated confrontation in a family home. A young woman stands, fist clenched, facing a man who leans against a wall with a defiant smirk. Around them, the shadows of onlookers loom, their expressions tense. Akua stood at a crossroads. Exposing the conspiracy would bring justice for her parents but could also ruin the legacy of those who had helped her along the way, including Kwame. Keeping it buried, however, felt like betraying the very principles her father had died defending. In the end, she chose a middle path. Akua anonymously leaked the evidence to investigative journalists, ensuring the truth came to light without directly implicating her family. It was a gamble, but one she believed honored both her parents and Kwame. A late-night scene in a cluttered office. A young woman sits at a laptop, her face illuminated by the screen as she clicks send, her expression a mix of determination and fear. The story exploded across the news, leading to arrests and widespread public outrage. While some celebrated the whistleblower's courage, others sought to silence her. Akua began receiving threats, and her movements were closely watched. One night, her home was broken into. Though nothing was stolen, the message was clear: stay silent, or else. Fearing for her safety, Akua turned to Nana, who suggested going into hiding for a while. A shadowy figure stands outside a modest home at night, the glow of a cigarette faintly visible. Inside, a young woman peers out through parted curtains, her face pale with fear. As the dust settled, Akua emerged from hiding with a renewed sense of purpose. She began speaking publicly about the importance of standing up against corruption, using her story to inspire others. Her bravery earned her both enemies and allies, but Akua remained steadfast.